One thing that I'll be intrigued in watching over the next few weeks of this tournament is Jobe Bellingham, who now is a Borussia Dortmund player. Has come from Sunderland, got them into the Premier League. It's an amazing story, really. But then you remember that, hang on a second, have we not been here before with a certain Bellingham as well?
Well, we kind of have. But of course, just like with Sunderland, he won't be wearing a Bellingham on the back of his shirt.
Yeah, to distinguish himself from the other Bellingham.
Yeah, I think which is quite interesting. I think that there's quite a lot of risk in this move. I think. Look, he's someone who's just come off the back of a very good championship season, one that started stronger than it finished. If we're talking about various stages of tiredness, maybe a bit like his brother's first season at Real Madrid, you could argue. And I'm really interested to see how this will work out, because of course it's impossible not to look at him and think of his brother, especially now he's at Dortmund.
He looks like his brother-in-law.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now we know that his brother had a really positive experience though over those 3 years, and the way they looked after him, the way they developed him, clearly those are things that all appeal to the family. But there is no separating the fact that he can wear what he wants on the back of his shirt. Everyone knows that he's a Bellingham, and that comes with pressure. Now, on the other hand, it's unrealistic to say that Jude Bellingham arrived with no pressure. They paid 25 million for a 16-year-old, by the way, who'd not played that many first-team games, and he played none at the top level, just like Jude is in the same situation. And the day that he arrived, I'm sure I've told this story before, but the day that his plane arrived at Dortmund, Jude Bellingham, to sign for the club, Dortmund sent 3 separate cars so they could sneak him into one and lead the press off in other directions. What 16-year-old does that happen to? So from minute one, there's a pressure. You know, there's a sense of this is a star.
Jude, I suppose, had every single club after him at that point. There's an interesting little story that actually frames this, though. So a journalistic colleague saw Mark Bellingham, the father, at an event, and went up to him, kind of, I suppose, in the way we do, trying to ingratiate himself. I said, I really admire your son. And Mark, who I suppose is known as a little bit of a spiky character, he snapped back, which son? I've got 2, you know. but I like it. It's in those little words, because there is obviously a dynamic, and like fair play, the family are obviously conscious that Jobe has his own career. And even though he's followed in this footstep, it's a very different thing. And he's I suppose it's important for them as well to alleviate the pressure, but also it comes to such an interesting point for Dortmund, because it suddenly feels like they're trying to kind of resuscitate this model they had, a model that we've discussed on the show before, a model that was actually it's suddenly been kind of appropriated by the biggest clubs, where suddenly it's Real Madrid going to kind of buying the 17-year-old from River Plate, not like Dortmund or Porto. And so Dortmund got to the Champions League final last year, basically, with essentially a team of cast-offs, really, rather than kind of the way they've done it before, which is the next best generation.
And they've kind of doubled down on that, haven't they, really, when you look back to last summer's transfer business. So, you know, they went out and kind of did what Bayern are caricatured for doing. They went and bought the best players of the opposition. You think of Stuttgart finished second, so they're like, okay, well, we'll have your best centre forward. We'll have Serhou Guirassy. We'll have Valdemar Anton, who's recently your best centre back, who's recently committed to the club. But we're going to offer him twice as much money, and you won't be able to say no. And that feels to people. If you took the names out of that and asked a casual observer of German football what club has done that, they'd all say Bayern. And it was Dortmund. And Dortmund kind of are a little Bayern these days, aren't they? But you look at that, you look at those signings, you look at the signing of Pascal Gross, very accomplished, but 33 years old and has come from the Premier League on not small wages, not one for the future, it's fair to say. And that is an admission of the failure of Dortmund's recruitment and development over the last couple of years, because that's why I think this is a risk, not just for Dortmund in hoping that it'll prove to be worthy of the Bellingham legacy and all that kind of stuff, but for Jobe Bellingham himself, because they spend ages, the family, working out where he's going to go. Remember, he has offers from Eintracht Frankfurt, very good at developing players in recent years, Leipzig, whose record developing players really speaks for itself, not to mention Premier League interest. And they are saying, by accepting this move, we believe you, Borussia Dortmund, can develop our son into a world-class player like you developed our other son into a world-class player.
Yes, like you developed our other son.
Yes, but I think there are two aspects to that. One, like I was saying with Lars last week, I don't think you can say that Jude Bellingham or Erling Haaland, who would be the big two flag bearers of young players they've developed in recent years.
Sancho arguably would be there as well.
No, but those two are the ones to double down on in recent years, in the 2020s, because those are players, and you think, oh yeah, Dortmund are really good at developing players. Those players would have been stars wherever they ended up. They are generational talents. And so to say that, it shows that Dortmund's a great finishing school for young players, I don't think it does show that, really. It's not really evidence of that. Sancho's a little bit different because Sancho has talent and they help him realise that talent. But I think you look at other players in recent years that they've signed on that sort of model. Karim Adeyemi, who's very good on his day, but they spent a lot of money and they jumped to the top of the queue. They jumped above the likes of Bayern, saying, you come here, we'll make you into a star, like Sancho and all those others before. And it's not quite happened for him. He's had some moments, but I don't know, is Adeyemi a much better player than when he arrived at Dortmund? I don't know about that. And I think you look at someone like Felix Metscher. Okay, he got repositioned last season and has come back from what was a very bad first season, but the jury's still out a little bit there. I mean, Dortmund will certainly hope, I think, looking at the profile of their team, that really it will be Metscher, Bellingham sort of centre of midfield for the next couple of years, and that should do them well. But it's not a given. That's my point. So the risk is not only a risk that Dortmund are taking on Jobe, it's a risk that Jobe and his family are taking on Dortmund.
But you can understand why they're taking that risk, can't you, Miguel? Because, like Andy says, they saw what Dortmund did for their previous son. And certainly Dortmund at that time had this kind of mystique of being a place where, which develops players, not just developing them to be a better player. But remember, with Jude Bellingham, they developed him from being a Birmingham City player to being a Real Madrid player. That's a huge leap in even the best of terms. But Andy seems to question whether that was really there at Dortmund. And I wonder whether you have a view on that, because the image is that, there is something going on. They've got a Midas touch.
Well, it's funny. I mean, Bellingham actually sort of closed that era, didn't he? Like, that was after a decade of Dortmund doing this, principally through kind of the Klopp team and how quickly that moved on. I think actually it's funny now, the first was Nuri Sahin that went to Madrid, was it, in 2010?
Yeah, that's right, after the first winning season, 2011. Yeah.
And then when Bellingham goes to Madrid in 2023, that suddenly, it feels like the last of that. There's a chapter called a year after Haaland going. But I think to be even separate to Dortmund, who almost have to prove themselves anew, there's another aspect here, which is basically, if you're a developing player, the German league is actually a good league to go to. It's a young players' league. It's a lot of space. Now, the flip side of it is, actually, if you talk to some Premier League clubs now, the Premier League, just by its wealth, has become almost like the top level. It's the most exacting. That they are very 50-50 on signing players from Germany because it's very hard to know how good a player is. And the flip side to that, if you are a young player, there's space to develop. There's not the same pressures. Like, obviously the Bayern dynamic conditions a lot. There's a willingness to play youth. There's an openness. And I mean, and given Bellingham's style, it does feel he very much fits the kind of, or Jobe style, should I say, maybe to differentiate. It does feel he fits the kind of, the prevailing model of German football, which is high intensity, pressing. And
big transitions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the question I would ask you, if you think that Germany's the right place for him to develop, and I'm not arguing with that as well, and if he wants to make his own way, clearly, what makes you choose Borussia Dortmund instead of Eintracht Frankfurt?
Well, surely in this case, it is genuinely the links, the established links.
I mean, it has to be, right?
There's also another interesting thing about this, actually, which I think is a welcome development, given I've just spoken about the power of the Premier League, which is the willingness of a certain strand young player now to just bypass that and kind of be willing to evolve their career away from the big show.
I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? I think
that's a really good point.
Football is way more European for like the under 30s than you would think. I mean, everyone said at the time when Jadon Sancho, and of course he was a trailblazer to a certain extent, what a massive leap it is from him to go from Manchester City to Borussia Dortmund. And Pep Guardiola never understood it at the time. I've never seen him look more gobsmacked in a press conference, well, at least not until last season, when he was sat there going, I don't know why. We offered him to stay and he just didn't want to stay. And actually, I think if you look at like FIFA or now EAFC culture among younger people, it's not about, we think of the Premier League as the ultimate product, all the teams in the Premier League as the ultimate product. But it's not necessarily that for younger people. I think for them, teams like Borussia Dortmund, Bayern Munich, Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico, etc., mean a lot more to them than the bottom half of the Premier League. So for us, what we see as, brave new world, what a punt, British people aren't particularly culturally adaptable, all of that sort of stuff. They're thinking, okay, that's a name that I can get with. And of course, the more go, the more feel empowered to go. And I think that's what we're seeing in the flow at the moment. The flow of players. Well, I suppose it's more of a trickle than a flow, isn't it? But maybe it's gonna become a flow.